Council discussion and comments. Anyone want to kick it off?
I'll be clear. I love the idea that these 3 lots will be pulled off the development rolls, if you will, and maintained as open space. I struggle to understand why a landowner would agree to continue to accept liability for a tax break that seems to be an inadequate payoff for a reduction in a very small tax burden. Excuse me. So I'm suspicious that the conservation easement would be workable. But in the end, I don't really have a strong feeling one way or another. If these can be maintained as open space, I don't care whether it's a conservation easement or whether the city owns the land. I think it's probably more reasonable for us to own the land and just, you know, kind of accept the fact that owning land comes with liability. But, you know, as long as these are maintained as open space, I'm fine either way.
So, and thank you, Carlos, for an excellent presentation. I want to make sure that we leave all alternatives on the table. There may or may not be a reason to use a conservation easement here, but to the extent there would be, I think we need to explore that option. And as I understand it, you're going to be doing some more research and kind of getting a better picture of what we might be facing. But I think many people in the community, and certainly the people on the council and on Belmont's staff, are aware that there are drainage issues in this town. And so when we're talking about liability, sometimes people think they jump to a trip and fall on the property, because that's kind of the most often encountered instance of liability. But when we're talking about liability for a piece of land like this, we also have to think about who's the uphill neighbor, who's the downhill neighbor. Could there be a drainage issue that arises, and could the city then be on hook for some expensive alterations to that property to change a drainage configuration? That's my concern. I like the idea of protecting these parcels as open space, but I'm also mindful of the comments that Mayor Lieberman made, and I agree with them. On a broader level, you know, we in Belmont have made a decision to protect open space, and I think that's wonderful. But in so doing, we have the other side of that equation is we lose the revenue potential for development of that land, and that's fine. That's a decision we've made. When we take these parcels off the rolls, not only are we not developing them, we're also losing something. And while it's not a big deal, or doesn't seem to be a big deal when we're talking about 3 parcels, I think it's good to keep in mind the more global view of, you know, how many parcels are out there? Do we want to acquire more of them, all of them? What would it cost? What would the cost of the city be? And I bring this up because, as we all know, we have serious infrastructure needs in this city, and we have a shortage of funds to meet those infrastructure needs. So I do think we need to keep that in context when we're talking about this. Again, I'm supportive of protecting these parcels as open space. I just think we need to keep all those things in mind when we're taking these actions. And I certainly think that we need to keep all alternatives on the table and make sure that we're not exposing ourselves to liability.
You have any comments?
Carlos, you know, Councilmember Reed kind of asked the question and said, well, why would someone accept that type of situation? Can you just explain, if I'm a landowner, why would I agree to keep the liability, you know, for myself as opposed to, and protect the city?
Yeah, actually, it would be because they have no other option.
If I could.
Short and sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, so if I'll just kind of throw it in. If the city doesn't take it, they either continue to pay taxes, right? They go into default, which people may not want to do, or the conservation agent. I mean, again, in some sense, the city has the leverage, I think, on this type of situation, because it's not that we have to take the land, and now the question is, what situation?
It's really what terms do we want to take it
on,
under? We
yeah.
could take it in fee, which is, I think, what they're offering in this particular case.
Correct.
Well, and frankly, I think I heard on the dais that maybe in this particular case, this isn't the issue, but we ought to keep this in play, and we ought to consider that, and maybe as we talk to owners, that we talk about easements as an alternative. I think that the benefit to the owner is they can get rid of this tax liability, and so oftentimes you'll see that as the reason for doing that. These kind of easements exist for all kinds of reasons, and I would say not so often on little. I don't know how big are these. These are. I mean, some of these are pretty small.
Yeah, these lots are
Less than 5,000 square feet, or 5,000
5 to
square
6
feet.
for the Bartlett lots, and then the Alhambra lot is actually 2. So
That's
it's
the
probably
bigger one, yeah.
10,000 square feet. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. There's not a lot of motivation there, but $1,600 a year, or whatever the tax liability is on each of those parcels. I mean, it would add up, and if they could eliminate that from their portfolio, I think they might want to do that. But maybe they wouldn't. But there's not many alternatives for them with those particular parcels.
That may be. You'd have to explore that. I mean, you could also, as a private landowner, sell it for $1 to somebody else and rid yourself of the liability that way and cut the city out. Councilman Stone brought up a good point, which is setting aside open space in this area of the city comes at an expense that the rest of the city is paying for. Right, and I think I don't have that's a nagging concern that I have, right? That this neighborhood is benefiting and others are paying for it. If you're removing property from the tax rolls, everybody in town is paying for that, and so I guess I'd like to know, do we have an overall plan for? I know there's a San Juan Hills area plan, but is there a goal in the city to acquire all of these lots and turn this all into open space? And if so, what's the overall cost to the city in terms of lost development potential and lost revenue?
Well, we don't get these very often.
But over the course of my time living here, we've gained, what, 40 acres?
Sure. I mean, the Lemur properties, that was something that doesn't happen very often. But you're correct. I mean, it's, it's a strong consideration about having the continued acquisition of parcels that takes them off the rolls, that then shifts burden to other areas. It's a good point about, the city now would have to assume the costs related to an annual sewer and storm drain fee. In terms of what the San Juan Hills area plan describes, there's certainly goals, policies, and objectives that look to preserving maximum amounts of open space. There are also policies in there that do discourage acquisition of parcels that may come with liability concerns, whether it's geotechnical or drainage. There are tools out there, as the city attorney and Greg have described, about conservation easements, restrictive covenants that can get what you want, which is the preservation of open space, but again, doesn't shift that liability to the city. Now, again, if it can be beneficial to these property owners from a tax perspective, then I think that's something that they would all certainly be looking for. We'd have to explore that with them.
I understand. There's multiple ways to do it. I guess what I'm starting to, something Councilman Stone said makes me start to wonder, what is the cost to the city of the course of action we are taking? The benefit, of course, is open space. That's very easy to see. But what is the cost, right? We've acquired, how many acres? 40 acres or thereabouts?
In total, we acquired 35 with the Lemur properties. In terms of the other handful of lots that we've acquired over the last 5-ish years, we probably acquired in the neighborhood of another 3 or 4 acres of
Okay,
land.
so 38 acres have been set aside as open space, yet the central neighborhood doesn't even have a park. Right? So I guess maybe this is for a future meeting. This is more of a policy issue. If we continue down the road of acquiring open space in this area, the benefit to me is very easy to see. This open space is, preserved forever. I think it's a great thing. But I'd like to know what the cost is, and I'd like to know what our mechanism is going to be to recoup the cost of acquiring this open space. I think that's something worthy of a discussion.
And we're open to that as well.
If I could just clarify, too, just to make sure for the benefit of the audience and the audience at home, this is not an action item tonight. We're in no position to take a vote on this, right? This is just on for discussion.
This is discussion and direction. We just wanted to see if there's interest in the council in having staff explore in further detail these 3 lots on a donation perspective. And again, there are other ways to potentially achieve what you're looking for, which is open space. So we don't have a resolution as part of this. We just want to see if you're interested in taking this further.
Okay. So the way I will summarize where I think the council is, and correct me if I'm not summarizing correctly, from a policy perspective, the council is certainly interested in open space opportunities. We want to do so in a financially prudent manner, which means short and long-term liability issues. So if there is a way, so to the extent that there are different ways for us to achieve the open space, to increase our open space, we'd like to understand what those options are in a little more detail, and would be interested in having the city staff kind of investigate those more fully. So if a conservation easement can obtain us the benefits of open space, take the land off the development roll, so to speak, but possibly do it in a way that's financially more advantageous to the city than simply acquiring it, that's probably something that's of strong interest to the council. And to some extent, we may choose to take an action on these particular lots, whatever we choose to. The real issue for the council right now is, from a policy perspective, we have a number of these lots out there. What's the way we really want to think about them? And, we may think about these particular lots in the same way or not, but from what I understand as well, there doesn't seem to be any kind of time urgency with this, that we have to settle this in the next weeks or months. So clearly, all else being equal, the sooner we get a resolution on this, the better. But make sure you take your time to understand what the opportunities are. Is that a fair summary?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And does that give you direction that you need?
Yeah, I think to summarize, I think the council's looking for ways to secure open space, potentially without the track of acquiring it via fee title. If we can acquire this open space via conservation easement or restrictive covenant or some other method that provides better financial benefit to the city, reduces liability exposure, that's something the council is definitely interested in staff exploring. From an urgency standpoint, correct. This doesn't need to be solved this week or next month. I would imagine that these 2 property owners, though, would like to have this settled before the December 10th tax bill is due this year. So we'll certainly, do our best to get you information that gives you a good chance to make a decision on our next round here.
But again, and to the extent, as I understand it, to the extent that there's any time urgency, in a sense, it works in the city's favor, so to speak, in terms of, it's not that they have other options. I mean, for example, if they were to sell their land for $1, somebody else is going to start taking the tax burden on.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So
yeah, they have the option of selling these properties today.
Yeah.
And
So it's more or less, we're really trying to understand how can we do this in a financially responsible manner to the city? Because the worst thing would be to take an action like this and then find out that we've done something that exposes the city to any unexpected liability or great cost, because it's not like there's anything imminent for being developed here.
Well, I would agree with the notion that we need to do it in the most risk-averse, financially sound way. I think that's smart. But I think there's also, a long-term vision that we have to have as we continue to issue restrictive covenants or, acquire property through donation. We are removing tax dollars that get used citywide for the benefit of one area. And I want to know what our policy is around that. What does this council think is the right thing to do?
So I know we have our Friday workshop. Can we add this to the list of items that we at least begin to touch on? I know it's a full day.
You're not going to get.
I'm not